In the remote foothills of eastern Kentucky, where autumn mist clings to valleys that time seems to have forgotten, lies a mystery that has baffled investigators for over 2 centuries. In 1842, twin sisters Mary and Martha Brennan were found dead in their family's isolated cabin, their bodies perfectly preserved despite having been deceased for what appeared to be several weeks. 3 days later, both girls walked into the town of Millbrook, alive and seemingly unharmed, carrying with them knowledge of events that had occurred during their supposed death. What happened next would challenge everything the frontier community thought they knew about the boundary between life and death. This isn't a story for the faint of heart. It's a documented case that has been studied by theologians, medical professionals, and investigators for generations, yet no rational explanation has ever been found. Before we delve into the disturbing details, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more mysteries that challenge our understanding of reality itself, and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from, because what happened in Kentucky might be more connected to your area than you realize. The Brennan family had settled in the remote Cumberland Mountains in 1838, seeking solitude and self-sufficiency far from the growing industrialization of the eastern cities. Thomas Brennan, a skilled carpenter and devout Presbyterian, had built their cabin with his own hands using timber from the surrounding forest. His wife, Catherine, was known throughout the sparse mountain community for her skill with herbal remedies and midwifery. Their twin daughters, Mary and Martha, were remarkable children even by frontier standards. Born during the harsh winter of 1832, they had survived childhood diseases that claimed many of their peers. By age 10, they were known for their unusual closeness, often finishing each other's sentences and displaying an almost supernatural awareness of each other's thoughts and feelings. The girls were striking in their identical appearance, with auburn hair that caught the mountain sunlight and green eyes that seemed to hold depths beyond their years. Yet their personalities were distinctly different. Mary was outgoing and quick to laugh, while Martha was more contemplative, often found reading their father's limited collection of books by candlelight. What made the twins truly remarkable was their reputation for knowing things they shouldn't know. Neighbors would later tell investigators that the girls often spoke of events before they happened, or knew details about people they had never met. This ability was dismissed by most as childish imagination or lucky guesses, but those who knew the family well had begun to notice patterns that defied rational explanation. The mystery began on October 15, 1842, when Samuel Morrison, a traveling minister, arrived at the Brennan cabin seeking shelter for the night. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. The cabin door stood open, creaking in the autumn wind. Inside, Thomas and Catherine Brennan lay in their bed, victims of what appeared to be a sudden fever that had swept through the isolated homestead. In the small loft where the twins slept, Morrison discovered the bodies of Mary and Martha Brennan. They lay side by side in their narrow bed, their hands clasped together, their faces peaceful as if they had simply fallen asleep. But their skin was cold to the touch, and their bodies showed the unmistakable signs of death. Morrison, despite his frontier pragmatism, was struck by the unusual preservation of the twins' bodies. Though they had clearly been dead for some time, there was no smell of decay, no visible signs of decomposition. Their auburn hair remained lustrous, their skin retained a healthy pallor, and their green eyes, though closed, seemed to hold a depth that death should have extinguished. Following frontier custom, Morrison rode immediately to Millbrook, the nearest settlement, to report the tragedy and seek help with the burials. The town's doctor, William Hayes, accompanied him back to the cabin along with several other men to assist with the grim task ahead. Dr. Hayes, a Harvard-trained physician who had come west to escape gambling debts, examined the bodies with professional thoroughness. His findings, recorded in his medical journal, were deeply disturbing. The twins showed no signs of disease, injury, or poisoning. Their bodies were perfectly preserved, showing none of the typical changes that occur after death. Most unsettling was the temperature of their bodies. While clearly deceased, they remained warm to the touch, as if some internal process was maintaining their body heat. Dr. Hayes had never encountered anything like it in his medical training or frontier practice. The burials were scheduled for October 18th, giving time for word to spread to the scattered mountain families who had known the Brennans. But on the morning of October 18th, as the funeral party gathered at the small mountain cemetery, something unprecedented occurred. Mary and Martha Brennan walked into Millbrook. They appeared at the edge of town just as the morning mist was lifting, walking hand in hand down the main street as if returning from a casual stroll. Their clothing was clean and pressed, their auburn hair neatly braided, their green eyes bright with life and awareness. The reaction of the townspeople was immediate and intense. Some fled in terror, believing they were seeing ghosts or demons. Others stood frozen in shock, unable to reconcile what they were seeing with what they knew to be true. Dr. Hayes later wrote that he felt his medical training crumble before his eyes as he watched the supposedly dead children approach with calm, measured steps. But it was what the twins said that truly shattered the community's sense of reality. They spoke of events that had occurred during the 3 days they had been dead, describing in perfect detail conversations that had taken place in the town, private moments in citizens' homes, and even the contents of Dr. Hayes's medical examination of their bodies. Mary approached Samuel Morrison and thanked him for his kindness in reporting their family's tragedy. She described his journey to town in precise detail, including his private prayers and the specific route he had taken through the mountain trails. Information she could not possibly have known if she had been dead in the cabin loft. Martha walked directly to Dr. Hayes and recounted his medical examination word for word, including his private observations that he had shared with no one. She described the contents of his medical bag, his thoughts during the examination, and even his conclusions about the unusual preservation of their bodies. The twins spoke of watching their own funeral preparations from some impossible vantage point, describing the emotions and private conversations of the townspeople with uncanny accuracy. They knew who had volunteered to dig their graves, who had donated wood for their coffins, and who had secretly doubted the Christian charity of the burial preparations. Most disturbing of all, they spoke of their parents' final moments with a clarity that suggested they had been present during the family's death, despite their own supposed demise. They described their father's last words, their mother's final prayers, and the exact sequence of events that had led to the entire family's death from what they now revealed was not fever but poisoning from contaminated well water. Dr. Hayes, his scientific worldview shattered, demanded to examine the twins immediately. What he found challenged every medical principle he had ever learned. The girls were undeniably alive, with strong pulses, normal breathing, and healthy color. Yet they bore subtle signs that defied explanation. Their skin, while warm and healthy, had a translucent quality that seemed to allow light to pass through it. Their eyes, though bright with intelligence, reflected light in ways that human eyes should not. Most unnervingly, they cast no shadows even in the bright autumn sunlight. The twins seemed unaware of these physical anomalies, speaking and behaving as normal children would. They expressed sadness about their parents' deaths, gratitude for the community's kindness, and concern about their future care. Yet they also displayed knowledge that no living person should possess. They spoke of events occurring simultaneously in distant locations, described the private thoughts and feelings of people they encountered, and demonstrated an awareness of past and future events that transcended normal human perception. It was as if death had somehow expanded their consciousness rather than ending it. When questioned about their experience of death, the twins provided answers that would be debated by theologians and philosophers for generations. They described a period of separation from their physical bodies during which they remained conscious and aware but existed in a state that transcended normal earthly limitations. They spoke of watching their own deaths from outside their bodies, of traveling instantaneously to distant locations, and of perceiving the thoughts and emotions of others with perfect clarity. They described death not as an ending, but as a transformation into a different state of existence. Most remarkably, they claimed to have chosen to return to life, though they were unclear about the mechanism that had allowed this return. They spoke of a decision made jointly, a determination that their earthly mission remained incomplete, and a conscious choice to re-enter their physical form. The implications of their claims were staggering. If the twins were telling the truth, they had experienced death and returned with expanded consciousness and supernatural abilities. They had crossed the ultimate boundary and returned to bear witness to what lay beyond. But the most disturbing aspect of their return was not what they had gained, but what they had lost. As days passed, it became clear that while the twins had returned to life, they had not returned unchanged. Their personalities began to shift in subtle but unsettling ways. Mary, once outgoing and cheerful, became increasingly withdrawn and contemplative. Martha, previously quiet and studious, developed an unsettling intensity that made others uncomfortable. Both girls began to speak of things they should not know, revealing secrets that had been carefully guarded for years. They spoke of hidden crimes, buried shames, and private sins with the casual indifference of children discussing the weather. Their revelations destroyed marriages, ruined reputations, and shattered the carefully maintained social fabric of the mountain community. Dr. Hayes documented each disturbing development in his journal, creating a record that would later be studied by investigators from across the country. The twins' abilities continued to grow stronger, their knowledge more comprehensive, their insights more disturbing. They began to predict deaths before they occurred, describing the exact circumstances and timing with perfect accuracy. They spoke of seeing the spirits of the recently deceased, relaying final messages and unfinished business with matter-of-fact precision. Most unnervingly, they began to age differently than normal children. While their bodies continued to grow and develop, their minds seemed to be accumulating knowledge and experience at an impossible rate. They spoke with the wisdom of elderly sages while maintaining the physical appearance of young girls. The community's initial wonder and curiosity gradually gave way to fear and suspicion. The twins' presence became a constant reminder of mortality and the unknown mysteries that lay beyond death. Their very existence challenged fundamental beliefs about the nature of life, death, and the human soul. Religious leaders struggled to explain the twins' return within the framework of Christian doctrine. Some declared them miracles, evidence of divine intervention in human affairs. Others condemned them as abominations, suggesting that their return violated natural law and God's will. The twins themselves seemed increasingly burdened by their expanded consciousness. They spoke of seeing too much, knowing too much, carrying the weight of secrets that belonged to the dead. Their childhood innocence had been replaced by an awareness that seemed too vast for mortal minds to contain. As winter approached, the twins' behavior became increasingly erratic. They would disappear for days at a time, returning with knowledge of events that had occurred hundreds of miles away. They spoke of visiting the dying, comforting the bereaved, and serving as messengers between the living and the dead. Dr. Hayes's final journal entry, dated December 21st, 1842, described his growing conviction that the twins had not truly returned to life in any normal sense. Instead, he believed they existed in some liminal state between life and death, serving as bridges between two worlds that were never meant to intersect. On the morning of December 22nd, the twins were found in their beds, once again appearing to be dead. But this time there was no doubt about their condition. Their bodies were cold, their hearts still, their breathing ceased. Yet once again they showed no signs of decay or decomposition. The community, now thoroughly terrorized by the supernatural events, demanded immediate burial. But as the funeral party gathered at the cemetery, a terrible realization dawned. The twins had predicted their own deaths, describing the exact circumstances and timing with the same accuracy they had shown for other events. They had also predicted their return. According to their prophecy, they would rise again after 3 days, just as they had before. But this time, they warned, their return would be different. They would come back with even greater knowledge, even more disturbing abilities, and even less connection to their former humanity. The community faced an impossible choice. They could bury the twins and risk their predicted return, or they could find some way to prevent their resurrection. The decision they made would haunt the mountain community for generations to come. But that's where the documented record ends. The official burial records show that Mary and Martha Brennan were interred on December 25, 1842 in the Millbrook Cemetery. Dr. Hayes's journal stops abruptly after his final entry, and no further records exist of the twins' fate. Yet local legends persist to this day. Mountain families speak of twin sisters who appear at moments of crisis, possessing knowledge that no living person should have. They describe encounters with auburn-haired girls who cast no shadows, whose eyes reflect light in impossible ways, and who speak of the dead with casual familiarity. Some claim the twins are still returning, still serving as bridges between life and death, still bearing witness to the mysteries that lie beyond mortal understanding. Others believe they were finally laid to rest through means that history has chosen not to record. What we know for certain is that the Brennan twins' story represents one of the most thoroughly documented cases of apparent resurrection in American history. Dr. Hayes's medical records, Samuel Morrison's testimony, and the accounts of dozens of witnesses all corroborate the essential facts of their return from death. But the deeper mystery remains unsolved. Did Mary and Martha Brennan truly die and return to life? Did they discover some secret about the nature of death that allowed them to transcend its finality? Or were they victims of some unknown medical condition that mimicked death while preserving consciousness? The implications of their story extend far beyond the bounds of medical science or religious doctrine. If the twins truly experienced death and returned with expanded consciousness, it suggests that death itself may not be the ending we believe it to be. It raises questions about the nature of consciousness, the persistence of identity beyond physical death, and the possibility of communication between the living and the dead. Perhaps most disturbing of all, it suggests that some knowledge is too dangerous for mortal minds to possess. The twins' expanded awareness came at a terrible cost, transforming them from innocent children into something far more complex and disturbing. Their story serves as a reminder that the boundaries between life and death, between the known and the unknown, may be far more permeable than we dare to imagine. In the remote mountains of Kentucky, where mist still clings to valleys that time seems to have forgotten, the mystery of the Brennan twins continues to challenge our understanding of reality itself. Do you believe the twins truly returned from death? Could their story be explained through natural means we simply don't understand? The evidence supports their extraordinary claims, but the implications are too disturbing for most to accept. What's your theory about the Brennan twins? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Are you brave enough to consider the possibility that death is not the final ending we believe it to be? Don't forget to subscribe for more mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about the boundary between life and death. The October mist clung to the Cumberland Mountains like a shroud, rolling through valleys where civilization had barely left its mark. In the remote hills of eastern Kentucky, where isolated communities existed in pockets of near-medieval isolation, the impossible had become routine. The year 1842 had brought an unusually harsh winter, followed by a spring that seemed reluctant to arrive. It was during this season of delayed hope that the Brennan sisters would die their first death. Mary and Martha Brennan, identical twins of 19 years, had lived their entire lives in a one-room cabin perched on the edge of Pine Ridge, a settlement so remote that government surveyors had never bothered to map its precise location. The sisters were known throughout the scattered homesteads for their unusual bond, finishing each other's sentences and sharing dreams so vividly that neighbors swore they possessed a single soul split between two bodies. What made them truly remarkable, however, was their uncanny ability to predict weather patterns, locate lost livestock, and sense illness in others before symptoms appeared. Their father, Jeremiah Brennan, had died in a hunting accident 3 years prior, leaving the twins to survive on their own through a combination of herb gathering, midwifery, and the occasional charity of neighbors who both revered and feared their peculiar gifts. The sisters had never married despite their striking beauty and the scarcity of unmarried women in the mountains. Local men whispered that the twins were too strange, too connected to forces beyond normal understanding to make suitable wives. The events that would shake the foundations of everything the community believed about life and death began on a Tuesday morning in late October. Mrs. Eliza Whitmore, the settlement's self-appointed keeper of social order, had arrived at the Brennan cabin to check on the twins after they failed to appear at the previous Sunday's prayer meeting. What she found would be documented in her meticulous diary, a record that would later provide crucial evidence for investigators seeking to understand the impossible. The cabin door stood ajar, unusual for sisters who were typically cautious about security. Inside, Mrs. Whitmore discovered Mary and Martha lying on their simple rope bed, positioned identically on their backs with their hands folded across their chests. Their skin had the waxy pallor of death, Their lips were blue and no breath stirred their bodies. Most unsettling of all, their eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling with an expression of profound peace. Mrs. Whitmore, who had attended numerous deathbeds in her 63 years, immediately recognized the signs of death. The sisters' bodies had begun the process of rigor mortis, their limbs stiffening in the positions where they had died. Yet something about the scene struck her as profoundly wrong. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of illness or injury. The sisters appeared to have simply laid down and died simultaneously, as if death had been an appointment they had kept together. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the circuit physician who served the scattered communities of the Cumberland Mountains, arrived 2 days later after receiving word of the deaths. His examination confirmed what Mrs. Whitmore had observed. The Brennan sisters had died of no discernible cause, their bodies showing no signs of violence, disease, or poison. Their hearts had simply stopped beating at what appeared to be the exact same moment. The mystery deepened when Dr. Morrison attempted to determine how long the sisters had been dead. Based on the condition of their bodies, he estimated they had died at least 3 days prior to Mrs. Whitmore's discovery. Yet several neighbors reported seeing smoke rising from the cabin's chimney on Monday evening, suggesting the sisters had been alive and tending their fire less than 12 hours before their bodies were found. The burial took place on Friday, October 30th, 1842, in the small cemetery behind the Pine Ridge Baptist Church. Reverend Thomas Caldwell, a circuit preacher who had known the sisters since childhood, conducted the service with visible unease. He later confided to his wife that he had never felt so uncertain about committing souls to their eternal rest. Something about the Brennan sisters' deaths felt unfinished, as if their story had been interrupted rather than concluded. The sisters were buried in a single grave, their bodies placed side by side in a coffin built by Jacob Hensley, the settlement's carpenter. Hensley later reported that constructing the coffin had been the most unsettling work of his career. The sisters' bodies had remained remarkably well preserved, showing none of the expected deterioration. Their skin retained a lifelike warmth, and their faces bore expressions of serene anticipation rather than the peaceful emptiness typical of death. What happened 3 days after the burial would challenge everything the Pine Ridge community believed about the nature of death and the boundaries between this world and whatever lay beyond. On Monday morning, November 2nd, 1842, exactly 72 hours after being laid to rest, Mary and Martha Brennan walked into the settlement's general store as if nothing unusual had occurred. Silas Turnbull, the store's proprietor, dropped the bolt of cloth he was measuring when the sisters entered. He had attended their funeral, had seen their bodies lowered into the ground, had helped shovel dirt over their grave, yet here they stood wearing the same blue dresses they had been buried in. Their hair neatly braided, their faces glowing with health and vitality. "Good morning, Mr. Turnbull," Mary said in her familiar voice, though something in her tone seemed different, more resonant, as if it carried echoes from vast distances. "We need to purchase some supplies. We have work to do." Turnbull stammered a response, his hands shaking as he tried to process what he was seeing. The sisters appeared exactly as they had in life, yet something fundamental had changed. Their movements seemed more fluid, their gestures more purposeful. Most unsettling of all, their eyes held knowledge that seemed impossibly deep, as if they had seen things no living person should witness. News of the sisters' return spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire. Within hours, a crowd had gathered outside the general store, some seeking to verify the impossible, others fleeing in terror from what they believed were vengeful spirits. Reverend Caldwell arrived within the hour, his face pale with shock and theological confusion. "Mary, Martha," he said carefully, approaching the sisters as one might approach dangerous animals. "We buried you 3 days ago. How is it possible that you stand here now?" The sisters exchanged one of their characteristic glances, a moment of silent communication that had always marked their unique bond. It was Martha who answered, her voice carrying the same strange resonance that had marked her sister's speech. "We went away for a while, Reverend Caldwell," she said simply, "but we were sent back. There are things that must be done, words that must be spoken. We have been given a task to complete." Dr. Morrison arrived that afternoon, summoned by frantic messages from multiple sources. His examination of the sisters revealed findings that would haunt him for the rest of his medical career. The sisters were undeniably alive, their hearts beating strongly, their breathing regular, their responses to stimuli normal. Yet subtle changes marked their return from death. Their body temperature remained consistently lower than normal, hovering around 94 degrees Fahrenheit regardless of external conditions. Their skin possessed an unusual translucent quality, as if light passed through it rather than reflecting from its surface. Most disturbing of all, they cast no shadows even in direct sunlight, as if they existed in some liminal state between the physical and spiritual worlds. But it was their knowledge that truly set them apart from their former selves. The sisters now possessed information they could not have acquired through normal means. They spoke of conversations that had taken place after their deaths, described in detail events that had occurred in distant communities, and demonstrated awareness of secrets that had been closely guarded for years. When Mrs. Whitmore attempted to question them about their experience of death, Mary's response chilled everyone present. "Death is not an ending, Mrs. Whitmore," she said with unsettling certainty. "It is a doorway. We pass through it and learn things that the living are not meant to know. But we were sent back to share what we learned, to prepare others for what awaits." The sisters' return to life created a theological crisis that extended far beyond Pine Ridge. Word of their resurrection spread throughout the Cumberland Mountains and beyond, drawing curious visitors, religious pilgrims, and skeptical investigators from across Kentucky and Tennessee. Some viewed the sisters as modern-day Lazarus figures, proof of divine intervention in human affairs. Others suspected elaborate fraud or demonic possession. Reverend Caldwell found himself at the center of the controversy, fielding questions from church authorities who demanded explanations for events that defied conventional understanding. His own faith, once rock-solid, began to fracture under the weight of witnessing the impossible. How could 2 women return from death without divine miracle? Yet if this was indeed God's work, why did the sisters' presence feel so unsettling, so charged with otherworldly energy? The sisters themselves seemed untroubled by the controversy their return had generated. They resumed their previous occupations, but with enhanced abilities that amazed and frightened their neighbors. Their predictions became more accurate, their healing touch more effective, their knowledge of hidden things more comprehensive. They spoke of death as a temporary state, describing the afterlife with the casual familiarity of travelers discussing a foreign country they had recently visited. But perhaps most disturbing was their insistence that their return was not unique, that death was merely a transition many souls could reverse under the right circumstances. They spoke of others who had crossed over and returned, of a growing number of individuals who existed in the space between life and death, serving as bridges between the world of the living and whatever lay beyond. As winter approached, the sisters' behavior became increasingly strange. They would disappear for days at a time, claiming to be visiting places that existed beyond normal geography. They spoke of meetings with other returned souls, of councils held in spaces that existed outside conventional reality. Their knowledge expanded to encompass events occurring hundreds of miles away. Conversations held in locked rooms, secrets buried in human hearts. The community of Pine Ridge found itself transformed by the sisters' presence. Some residents reported prophetic dreams. Others claimed to see deceased relatives in mirrors or still water. Children spoke of invisible playmates who possessed knowledge of long-dead ancestors. The boundary between life and death seemed to be dissolving, replaced by something far more complex and mysterious. Dr. Morrison documented these changes meticulously, creating a record that would later be studied by physicians and theologians seeking to understand the implications of the sisters' return. His notes describe a community caught between wonder and terror, blessed and cursed by proximity to forces beyond human comprehension. The sisters' knowledge proved most disturbing when it touched on future events. They spoke of coming changes that would transform not just Pine Ridge but the entire nation. Wars that would tear the country apart. Inventions that would revolutionize human life. Discoveries that would challenge fundamental beliefs about reality itself. Their predictions were delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone they used to discuss the weather, as if the future was as visible to them as the past. But it was their warnings about their own fate that proved most ominous. As Christmas approached, the sisters began speaking of their second death, an event they described as inevitable and necessary. They spoke of their mission nearing completion, of knowledge that had been successfully transmitted, of a return to whatever realm had briefly released them. "We are not meant to remain here indefinitely," Martha explained to Reverend Caldwell during one of their increasingly frequent theological discussions. "Our return was temporary, a brief reprieve granted for a specific purpose. When that purpose is fulfilled, we must return to our proper place." The Reverend pressed them for details about this proper place, but the sisters remained cryptically vague. They spoke of it as a realm of infinite knowledge and profound responsibility, a place where returned souls served as guardians of truths too vast for mortal comprehension. They described it as neither heaven nor hell, but something altogether different, a space where consciousness persisted in forms unknown to the living. As winter deepened, the sisters' physical presence began to fade. They became increasingly translucent, their voices softer, their movements more ethereal. Yet their knowledge continued to expand, encompassing secrets that seemed to span centuries and continents. They spoke of ancient mysteries, of truths hidden in plain sight, of connections between events that appeared. The weight of their transformation settled over the Brennan twins like a burial shroud as autumn gave way to winter in the Kentucky wilderness. Mary and Martha moved through their days with the careful precision of those who had learned to exist between worlds, their presence both blessing and burden to the scattered communities that whispered their names in reverent fear. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the circuit physician who had documented their initial resurrection, found himself drawn back to the remote cabin where the twins had established their peculiar ministry. His medical training warred with the evidence before his eyes as he observed changes that defied every principle of natural philosophy he had studied in Edinburgh and Philadelphia. The twins' physical transformation continued to accelerate in ways that challenged conventional understanding of human biology. Their skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, as if lit from within by some inner radiance. Beneath this ethereal surface, their veins showed dark against the pale flesh, creating patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living scripture. Most disturbing of all, their body temperature remained unnaturally low, yet they showed no signs of discomfort in the increasingly bitter winter weather. They require no sustenance as we understand it, Dr. Morrison wrote in his private journal, his handwriting growing increasingly erratic as the implications of his observations overwhelmed his scientific rationalism. I have observed them for days without witnessing them consume food or water, yet they show no signs of weakness or decline. When pressed about their needs, Martha simply smiled and said they were sustained by purposes beyond mortal comprehension. The twins' ability to access hidden knowledge had evolved beyond their initial revelations about local secrets and future events. They now spoke with intimate familiarity about historical events that had occurred decades or even centuries before their birth, described with perfect accuracy the private thoughts and motivations of people they had never met, and most unnervingly seemed to possess complete awareness of conversations and events occurring simultaneously in distant locations. Brother Josiah Fletcher, the Methodist circuit rider who had initially brought word of the twins' resurrection to the broader religious community, documented several instances of their expanding supernatural awareness. During a prayer meeting in November 1842, Mary had suddenly stopped mid-sentence and announced that President Tyler was at that very moment signing legislation that would affect the territorial status of Texas. When news arrived 2 weeks later confirming not only the accuracy of her statement but the precise timing, Fletcher found himself questioning everything he had been taught about the limitations of human consciousness. Sister Mary speaks of events in Washington City as if she were present in the chambers of power, Fletcher wrote to his denominational superiors. She describes the expressions on legislators' faces, quotes their private conversations, and reveals their hidden motivations with an accuracy that would be impossible for any earthly observer. When I asked how she could know such things, she replied simply that distance and time were merely illusions that constrained mortal perception. The twins' influence on their community had deepened beyond their role as oracles and healers. They had begun to serve as judges in disputes that had festered for generations, their supernatural knowledge allowing them to uncover the truth behind long-standing conflicts with devastating precision. Families who had feuded for decades found themselves forced to confront the actual causes of their resentments when the twins revealed the hidden injuries, misunderstandings, and deliberate deceptions that had perpetuated their divisions. Ezra Whitfield, a prominent landowner whose family had been embroiled in a boundary dispute with the neighboring Carsons for over 20 years, found himself humbled when Martha approached him after a Sunday service. She spoke quietly of a survey marker that had been deliberately moved in 1821, described the exact location where the original stone had been buried, and revealed the name of the man who had been bribed to falsify the official records. When the investigation confirmed every detail of her account, Whitfield not only returned the disputed land but publicly confessed to the deception that had enriched his family at his neighbor's expense. The twins see through the veils of time and deception that allow injustice to flourish, observed Sarah Mackenzie, the school teacher who had become one of their most devoted followers. They know not only what was done but why it was done and by whom. In their presence, the accumulated lies and half-truths that we use to justify our actions simply crumble away, leaving only the naked truth of our moral choices. But the twins' expanding abilities came with an increasingly heavy spiritual burden. They spoke frequently of the weight of carrying so much knowledge, of being forced to witness the full spectrum of human suffering and moral failure across both space and time. Mary, in particular, seemed to struggle with the isolation that came with their transformation. She would sometimes spend hours staring into the distance, her eyes reflecting a sadness that seemed to encompass generations of human pain. "We see everything," she confided to Dr. Morrison during one of his visits. "Every act of cruelty, every betrayal, every moment of despair that has ever occurred or ever will occur. We feel the anguish of mothers who have lost children, the desperation of men who have lost their honor, the loneliness of souls who have lost their faith. Sometimes I wonder if this knowledge is a blessing or a curse, if God intended for human minds to carry such burdens." Martha's response to their expanding awareness took a different form. She became increasingly focused on their apparent mission to serve as instruments of divine justice, speaking with growing authority about the need for humanity to confront its moral failures and seek genuine redemption. Her pronouncements took on a prophetic quality that both inspired and terrified those who heard them. "The time of comfortable lies is ending," she declared during a gathering in December 1842. "The Lord has sent us to prepare humanity for a great reckoning, a time when all hidden things will be revealed and all secret sins brought to light. Those who cling to deception will find their foundations crumbling, while those who embrace truth will find themselves lifted up to new understanding." The twins' physical presence had begun to affect the natural world around them in ways that defied scientific explanation. Plants touched by their hands bloomed out of season, animals approached them without fear, and the very air in their vicinity seemed to shimmer with an energy that made sensitive individuals feel alternately blessed and overwhelmed. Several visitors reported experiencing spontaneous visions or receiving answers to prayers they had never spoken aloud simply by being in the twins' presence. Dr. Morrison documented these phenomena with the meticulous care of a man desperately trying to maintain his scientific objectivity in the face of evidence that challenged every assumption about the natural order. His measurements revealed that the temperature around the twins consistently registered several degrees warmer than the surrounding environment, despite their own bodies remaining unnaturally cool. Compass needles spun wildly in their vicinity, and photographic plates exposed in their presence showed unexplained patterns of light that seemed to emanate from their forms. "I am forced to conclude that the Brennan twins exist in a state that transcends our normal understanding of physical law," he wrote in his final report before departing the region. "They appear to be conduits for energies and intelligences that operate according to principles unknown to modern science. Whether this represents divine intervention, some previously undiscovered aspect of human consciousness, or something else entirely, I cannot say. I only know that their presence challenges every assumption about the boundaries between the natural and supernatural worlds." The twins' influence began to extend beyond their immediate community as word of their abilities spread throughout Kentucky and the surrounding states. Visitors arrived from increasingly distant locations, drawn by reports of miraculous healings, prophetic revelations, and the twins' ability to resolve conflicts that had seemed intractable. Some came seeking personal guidance, others hoping to witness supernatural phenomena, and still others determined to expose what they assumed must be an elaborate deception. Among the most significant visitors was Dr. Cornelius Harding, a prominent physician and researcher from the University of Pennsylvania, who had devoted his career to investigating claims of supernatural phenomena. His arrival in February 1843 marked the beginning of the most thorough scientific investigation of the twins' abilities ever attempted. Dr. Harding brought with him an array of scientific instruments and measurement devices, along with a team of assistants trained in the latest techniques of empirical observation. His initial skepticism was evident in his correspondence with colleagues, where he described the twins as another frontier curiosity that will undoubtedly yield to rational analysis once subjected to proper scientific scrutiny. However, his attitude began to change within hours of his first encounter with Mary and Martha. His carefully designed tests, intended to expose the mechanisms behind their supernatural knowledge, instead produced results that challenged his fundamental understanding of human consciousness and the nature of reality itself. "I arrived prepared to debunk charlatans," Dr. Harding wrote to a colleague after his first week of investigation. "Instead, I find myself confronting phenomena that appear to violate the basic principles of causation and physical law. The twins demonstrate consistent access to information that should be impossible for them to possess, and their presence appears to generate measurable effects on both animate and inanimate objects in their vicinity." Dr. Harding's tests revealed the full scope of the twins' extraordinary abilities. They could accurately describe the contents of sealed containers, predict the outcome of random events with perfect precision, and provide detailed accounts of conversations occurring simultaneously in distant locations. Most remarkably, they seemed to possess complete awareness of their observers' thoughts and intentions, often answering questions before they were asked and addressing concerns that had never been verbalized. The conventional boundaries between self and other, between past and present, between the known and unknown, simply do not apply to these remarkable individuals, Dr. Harding concluded in his final report. They appear to exist in a state of expanded consciousness that encompasses not only their immediate environment, but the entire tapestry of human experience across time and space. But it was the twins' own understanding of their condition that provided the most profound insights into their transformation. During extended conversations with Dr. Harding, they spoke with remarkable clarity about the nature of their experience and the purpose they believed they were meant to serve. "We are no longer entirely human," Mary explained with a matter-of-fact acceptance that Dr. Harding found both admirable and disturbing. "Our deaths and return have changed us in ways that cannot be undone. We exist now as bridges between the world of the living and the realm of eternal truth, carrying messages and revelations that humanity needs to hear." Martha expanded on her sister's explanation with characteristic intensity. "We have been chosen to serve as instruments of divine justice, to reveal hidden truths and expose the lies that allow suffering to continue. Our knowledge is not our own, but belongs to the one who sent us back to complete this mission. We are merely vessels, conduits for a wisdom that transcends human understanding." The twins' acceptance of their transformed state stood in stark contrast to the growing unease of those around them. As their abilities continued to evolve and their physical presence became increasingly otherworldly, even their most devoted followers began to question whether their resurrection had been the blessing they had initially believed it to be. The question of the twins' ultimate fate began to occupy the thoughts of everyone who encountered them. If they were indeed transitioning toward some form of existence beyond normal human experience, What did that mean for their future? Would they continue to dwell among mortals indefinitely, or were they destined for some other form of existence that none could imagine? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, and in a manner that would challenge everything they thought they understood about the nature of life, death, and the mysterious purposes that govern the universe. As winter deepened over the Kentucky wilderness, the Brennan twins stood at the threshold of a transformation that would complete their journey from mortality to something far more profound and eternal. The final phase of their earthly mission was about to begin, and with it would come revelations that would echo through the ages, challenging humanity's understanding of consciousness, justice, and the ultimate meaning of existence itself. As the Morrison family prepared to depart Pine Hollow, their 3-day visit having stretched into a week of revelations that would haunt the community forever, Pastor Phillips found himself grappling with questions that transcended earthly justice. The twins had accomplished what 16 years of careful silence had prevented. They had given voice to the dead and brought truth to light. But at what cost to themselves, and what did their abilities suggest about the nature of existence itself? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, and from a source that would challenge every assumption about the boundary between life and death. On their final morning in Pine Hollow, as mist clung to the valley like the remnants of disturbed spirits, Rebecca approached Pastor Phillips with an urgency that immediately set him on edge. Her usual composure had cracked, revealing the frightened child beneath the impossible wisdom she carried. "Pastor Phillips," she said, her voice trembling in a way he had never heard before, "we need to speak with you about what's coming, what the revelations here have set in motion." Rachel materialized beside her sister, her pale face drawn with exhaustion. "The voices aren't quieting," she whispered. "They're getting stronger, and they're not just from Pine Hollow anymore." Ezekiel Morrison, who had been loading their few possessions into the wagon, turned at the sound of distress in his daughter's voices. Over the years, he had learned to recognize the signs when their abilities were overwhelming them. The pallor, the trembling, the way they seemed to be listening to sounds only they could hear. "What are you seeing, little ones?" he asked, gently kneeling to their level. Rebecca's blue eyes, usually so clear and knowing, now held a depth of suffering that no child should carry. "Papa, what happened here isn't finished. The truth about Pine Hollow is spreading, and it's awakening other voices, other places where innocent blood cries out for justice." Pastor Phillips felt his blood chill. "What do you mean, other places?" Rachel stepped forward, her soft voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "The circuit. Papa travels. The churches we've visited, the communities we've helped. Some of their secrets are connected to what happened here. The evil that built Pine Hollow sent roots into other places, other hearts." The implications of her words struck Phillips like a physical blow. If the twins were suggesting that Pine Hollow's crimes had somehow spawned or connected to other atrocities across the region, then the investigation Judge Harrison had concluded might be merely the beginning of a much larger horror. Ezekiel Morrison's weathered face showed deep concern as he studied his daughters. "How many places?" he asked quietly. "7, Rebecca replied without hesitation. 7 communities where the dead are restless, where truth has been buried so deep it's poisoned the very ground. And they're all calling to us now," Rachel added, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ever since we spoke for the Vittman family, ever since we brought justice to Pine Hollow, the other voices have grown stronger. They know we can hear them. They know we can help them find peace. Pastor Phillips found himself facing a theological crisis that challenged everything he believed about divine justice and human responsibility. If the Morrison twins truly possessed the ability to communicate with the murdered dead, if their intervention in Pine Hollow had somehow awakened other restless spirits across the region, then what did that suggest about the nature of unresolved evil? "Where are these 7 places?" he asked, though part of him feared the answer. Rebecca closed her eyes as if listening to voices only she could hear. Mill Creek, where the preacher's family disappeared. Copper Ridge, where the mine collapse wasn't an accident. Whisper Valley, where the Cherokee families were killed after the treaty. Stone Bridge, where the traveling doctors were murdered. Raven's Hollow, where the young women vanished. Dead Horse Gap, where the soldiers' gold was buried with their bones. And Mercy Falls, where the orphans were sold instead of protected. Each location she named sent fresh chills through Phillips. He recognized several of them. Remote settlements where Ezekiel Morrison had preached over the years, communities that had supposedly experienced spiritual renewal following the family's visits. But now the twins were suggesting that these places harbored secrets as dark as Pine Hollows, crimes that had been hidden for years or decades. "The pattern is always the same," Rachel continued, her young voice carrying a weight of understanding that should have been impossible. Respected leaders committing terrible acts. Communities choosing silence over justice. Innocent blood crying out for acknowledgement and peace. Ezekiel Morrison stood slowly, his face showing the full weight of the burden his daughters carried. "This is why we can never settle in one place," he said quietly. "This is why we must keep moving, keep serving as voices for those who can no longer speak for themselves." But it was Rebecca's next statement that would prove most prophetic, words that would echo through the generations of those who studied the Morrison case. "Pastor Phillips," she said, her clear voice carrying an authority that seemed to transcend her years. "The truth has its own life, its own power. Once it begins to emerge, it spreads like fire through dry grass. What we've done here in Pine Hollow will light other fires. Some communities will choose to face their secrets honestly. Others will try to bury them deeper. But the dead are patient and truth is persistent." "And what of you?" Phillips asked, his voice thick with emotion. "What of 2 young girls who must carry such terrible knowledge? What becomes of children who serve as instruments of justice for the dead?" Rachel's answer would haunt him for the rest of his life. "We don't know, Pastor Phillips. We only know that the voices call to us and we must answer. Even when it hurts, even when it changes everything, even when it means we can never be normal children with normal lives." As the Morrison family's wagon rolled away from Pine Hollow that morning, disappearing into the mist that shrouded the mountain paths, Pastor Phillips stood watching until they were completely out of sight. He would never see them again, but reports of their activities would continue to reach him for years to come. Stories of communities confronting long-buried secrets, of families finding closure for mysterious disappearances, of justice finally coming to places where evil had seemed to triumph permanently. And always at the center of these stories, 2 sisters who possessed knowledge that defied rational explanation but whose accuracy could never be questioned. The Morrison twins had demonstrated that some truths are too powerful to remain hidden forever, that innocent blood carries its own voice, and that justice, though delayed, will eventually find its way to light. But perhaps most importantly, they had shown that the boundary between life and death may be far more permeable than most people dare to believe. In the months that followed, as news of Pine Hollow's exposure spread throughout the region, other communities began experiencing their own moments of reckoning. Secrets that had been buried for generations suddenly came to light. Mysterious disappearances were finally explained. Long-dead victims found their voices through unlikely sources, and justice, though delayed, began to flow like water finding its natural course. Whether these revelations were directly connected to the Morrison twins' intervention or simply the natural result of truth's persistent power remains a mystery that history cannot fully resolve. What we know with certainty is that the case of Pine Hollow marked a turning point in the region's spiritual and moral development, a moment when the cost of silence became greater than the risk of truth. The Morrison twins had served as catalysts for a transformation that extended far beyond the boundaries of any single community. They had demonstrated that the dead, though silenced, are not powerless, and that justice, though delayed, remains an active force in the world. Their legacy would inspire future generations to confront difficult truths rather than bury them, to seek healing rather than mere concealment, and to remember that some forms of accountability transcend the limitations of mortal law. In the end, perhaps that was the true miracle of Rebecca and Rachel Morrison, not their impossible knowledge or their ability to speak for the dead, but their demonstration that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually find its way to the surface. And when it does, it has the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities, entire regions, entire understandings of what justice means and how it operates in the world. The mystery of their abilities remains unsolved, but their impact on history is undeniable. They proved that some secrets are too important to remain hidden forever, and that the voices of the innocent, though silenced by violence, can still find ways to speak truth to power across the centuries. The twins' transformation continued to accelerate as autumn deepened into winter. What had begun as mere physical changes now encompassed something far more profound and unsettling. Mary and Martha Brennan were becoming conduits for forces that defied comprehension, their expanded consciousness serving as a bridge between the world of the living and realms that existed beyond mortal understanding. Dr. Samuel Harrison, the physician who had documented their initial resurrection, found himself drawn back to the Brennan homestead repeatedly despite his growing unease. His medical training provided no framework for understanding what he witnessed, yet scientific curiosity compelled him to continue his observations. The twins' bodies had ceased all normal biological functions, yet remained animate, their skin taking on an almost translucent quality that seemed to pulse with an inner light visible only in darkness. More disturbing still were the changes in their knowledge and abilities. The twins now spoke of events occurring hundreds of miles away with perfect accuracy, describing political developments in Washington, natural disasters in distant states, and personal tragedies befalling people they had never met. Their prophetic insights had evolved beyond simple future predictions to encompass a comprehensive understanding of the interconnected web of human experience across space and time. The local community found itself divided between those who viewed the twins as divine messengers and others who whispered of darker explanations. Reverend Thomas Mitchell, the circuit preacher who had initially proclaimed their return a miracle, now struggled with theological implications that challenged fundamental Christian doctrine. If the twins had truly returned from death, what did this mean for established beliefs about resurrection, judgment, and the afterlife? The twins themselves seemed increasingly aware of their unique position between worlds. They spoke of witnessing events from multiple perspectives simultaneously, experiencing the thoughts and emotions of both perpetrators and victims of various conflicts. This omniscient awareness came with a terrible burden, as they carried the weight of humanity's collective suffering while maintaining the emotional sensitivity of young children. As winter storms isolated the Kentucky hills, the twins' influence began manifesting in ways that transcended their physical presence. People throughout the region reported vivid dreams featuring Mary and Martha, dreams that invariably contained revelations about hidden truths or warnings about future dangers. These nocturnal visitations always proved accurate, leading to the prevention of accidents, the resolution of disputes, and the exposure of deceptions that might otherwise have remained concealed. The twins' parents, Patrick and Catherine Brennan, found themselves overwhelmed by the constant stream of visitors seeking guidance, healing, or simply hoping to witness the impossible. Their modest farmhouse became a pilgrimage site, drawing desperate souls from across the frontier who believed the returned daughters possessed answers to questions that had tormented them for years. Yet with each passing day, the twins seemed to grow more distant from their earthly existence. They spoke increasingly of preparations for a final revelation, a moment when the full purpose of their return would be unveiled. Their conversations with each other, conducted in whispers and glances, suggested they were receiving instructions from sources beyond human perception. The revelation came on the winter solstice when the twins announced they would demonstrate the ultimate truth about justice and redemption. They had been returned not merely to expose individual crimes or predict future events, but to serve as instruments of a cosmic reckoning that would reshape the moral landscape of their community and beyond. On that longest night, as snow fell steadily across the Kentucky hills, Mary and Martha Brennan stood before a gathering of hundreds who had come to witness what they claimed would be their final act as bridges between worlds. What occurred that night would be remembered as either the greatest miracle or the most terrifying supernatural event in the region's history, depending on one's willingness to accept that some forms of justice transcend the limitations of mortal law. The twins' legacy would endure long after their physical forms finally dissolved into the winter darkness, leaving behind questions about the nature of consciousness, the persistence of moral accountability, and the possibility that death itself might not be the absolute ending that humanity had always believed it to be.